Ma'am, you need to leave this seat. Now. Check the passenger record first.
Wait, she owns this airline.
Part 1. The slap happened before anyone understood why a woman carrying a worn leather notebook was standing in the first-class aisle. Maya Ellison had spent the last 20 minutes watching passengers board Flight 482 with the quiet attention of someone who knew every part of an aircraft except the way people looked at her. She was a black woman in her early 40s, wearing a simple navy blazer, low heels, and a small silver watch scratched from years of work. Nothing about her appearance announced power. Nothing about it asked to be noticed. That was exactly why the first-class attendant decided she did not belong there. "Mom, I need to see your boarding pass again," the flight attendant said. Maya looked up from her notebook. "I already showed it at the door." "I understand that," the attendant replied, smiling in the careful way people smiled when they had already made a decision. "I just need to verify that this seat is actually assigned to you." The passenger behind Maya shifted his bag and glanced toward the aisle. A couple near the galley stopped talking. The aircraft was filling with the sounds of overhead bins closing, seatbelts clicking, and a beverage cart being positioned near the back. Maya handed over her phone with the boarding pass displayed. The attendant looked at it, then looked back at Maya. "You booked this yourself?" The question sat between them longer than it needed to. Maya lowered her phone. "Yes." The attendant scanned the screen again. "First class?" "Yes." The woman's expression barely changed, but Maya noticed the pause. It was the same pause she had experienced in conference rooms, hotel lobbies, and airport lounges. The moment when someone tried to solve a problem that only existed because they did not expect a person like her to have access. "I'm going to need you to step aside while we confirm this," the attendant said. "I'm not blocking anyone," Maya answered. "My seat is right here. I'm asking you to cooperate." The word was polite. The meaning was not. Maya closed her notebook and looked at the seat number beside her. She had chosen that seat because she liked being able to work during short flights. The notebook in her hand contained maintenance notes, route projections, and questions she needed answered before the morning executive meeting. "I'm happy to cooperate," she said. "I'm not comfortable being removed from my seat because you don't believe the ticket belongs to me." The attendant's smile disappeared. "Lower your voice." Maya blinked. A man across the aisle pulled out his phone, not recording yet, but holding it in a way that suggested he had noticed the shift. His name was Daniel Brooks, a regional sales manager who had flown this route dozens of times. He did not know Maya. He only knew the conversation felt familiar in a way he could not explain. The attendant stepped closer. "People are waiting." Maya glanced down the aisle. Several passengers were still boarding, but nobody was trapped. Nobody had asked for help. "Let them board," Maya said. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat." The attendant reached toward Maya's arm. That was when Maya moved back. "Please don't touch me." Kids were calm. The reaction was not. The attendant's hand moved quickly. The sounds of the slap cut through the aircraft cabin. For a moment, nobody moved. His face turned slightly from the impact. Her notebook slipped from her hand and landed on the carpeted floor. A page opened near her shoe, showing handwritten notes, not personal information, just observations from someone who had spent years studying how an airline worked from the inside out. The attendant looked shocked by her own action, but the next words came immediately. She became aggressive. Daniel stared at her. Nobody had seen Maya raise her voice. Nobody had seen her threaten anyone. Maya bent down, picked up the notebook, and carefully closed it. She did not call for a lawyer. She did not announce her position. She did not say the words that would have changed the way everyone looked at her. Instead, she looked at the flight attendant and asked one question. "Are you filing that statement as your official report?" The attendant hesitated. Maya waited. Because she knew something most people on that plane did not. The truth was already attached to a system that could not be changed by whoever spoke first. Part 2. The first mistake people made was assuming Maya Ellison was waiting for someone important to arrive. The second mistake was assuming she was waiting for permission to speak. The flight attendant stepped back and adjusted her uniform jacket. Her name tag read Caroline Voss. She was older than Maya by perhaps 10 years, with the polished confidence of someone who had spent a long time being trusted in public spaces. "Mom," Caroline said, lowering her voice, I'm not going to argue with you in front of passengers. Maya looked at her. That's not what I asked. Caroline glanced toward the front galley. I need the purser. Of course, Maya replied. The calmness bothered Caroline more than anger would have. Most conflicts in public ended when one person became emotional enough to be labeled the problem. Maya was not giving her that opportunity. Within a minute, the lead flight attendant, Marcus Hale, arrived from the rear of the aircraft. He was carrying a tablet and moving quickly, already wearing the expression of someone trying to contain an inconvenience before it became a report. What happened? Marcus asked. Caroline answered first. She refused to comply with a seat verification request, became confrontational, and when I attempted to manage the situation, she pulled away aggressively. Daniel Brooks looked up from his seat. That's not what happened. The three of them turned toward him. Daniel immediately regretted speaking. He had no connection to Maya, no reason to involve himself. He was simply tired of watching the same kind of moment happen and watching everyone pretend they had not seen it. Marcus looked at him. Sir, were you involved in the interaction? I was sitting here. That wasn't my question. Daniel paused. He understood the question, behind the question. Were you qualified to describe what you saw? He looked at Maya, then back at Marcus. No, I'm not involved. But I watched it. Marcus nodded slowly and entered something into his tablet. Maya noticed the movement. What are you recording? Marcus looked at her. A service incident. Before anyone has asked for my statement, we're gathering information. No, Maya said. You're documenting one version. The aisle became quieter. Marcus frowned. I'm trying to resolve this professionally. So am I. The words were not sharp. That made them harder to dismiss. Maya picked up her notebook again. She ran her thumb along the worn edge of the cover, a small habit she had developed years earlier when reviewing aircraft inspection reports. The notebook was not expensive. It was not impressive. But inside it were pages from someone who knew the difference between a delayed flight and a preventable failure. Marcus noticed the notebook. Are you an employee of the airline? No. Then why do you have operational notes? Maya looked at him for a second. There it was. Another assumption. Not about her seat. It's about her knowledge. I work in aviation, she said. Caroline crossed her arms. Everyone says that. Maya turned toward her. That may be true. She looked back at Marcus. But that doesn't answer what happened. A silence followed, not dramatic, just uncomfortable, the kind created when a simple accusation starts requiring details. Marcus glanced at Caroline. Did you strike the passenger? Caroline's face changed. Only slightly, no. Daniel looked confused. Maya did too. The denial came too quickly. Still, I did not strike her. Caroline continued. I made contact while trying to prevent escalation. Marcus looked back at Maya. Maya did not respond immediately. She reached into her bag and removed a small folder. Legal document. Not a threat. Just a printed copy of the airline's customer incident procedure. Marcus recognized the formatting. Where did you get that? Dale looked at him. It's publicly available. That answer was true, but incomplete. Caroline noticed the exchange. Why do you have airline procedures printed? Maya closed the folder. Because when systems fail, people usually ask the person with the least power to prove what happened. Nobody answered. Then Marcus's tablet made a sound. Notification. He looked down. The message was from Operations Control. Request. Hold boarding door closure. Senior review required. Marcus read it twice. His expression changed. Not because he knew who Maya was. He did not. But because someone in operations had recognized something in the incident report before he had even finished writing it. Airline noticed. What is it? Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Maya. May I ask your full name? Maya picked up her boarding pass from the seat. For the first time since entering the aircraft, she turned it over and let him see the name printed clearly. Maya Ellison. Marcus stared at it. The name meant nothing to Caroline. But it meant something to him. Because 3 months earlier, every employee in their company had watched a training video featuring that same name. Not as a passenger, not as a guest. As the woman who had signed the largest ownership transfer in the airline's history. Maya Ellison was not traveling on someone else's airline. She owned it. And now the first official report about her was already being written. Part 3. The first person to understand the seriousness of the moment was not Caroline. It was Marcus. He had worked for Ellison Airways for 11 years, long enough to remember when the company was not an airline people talked about. Back then, it was a regional carrier with aging aircraft, thin margins, and a reputation for surviving problems rather than preventing them. Maya Ellison changed that. She did not arrive with a dramatic announcement or a promise to transform the industry overnight. She arrived with maintenance reviews, employee interviews, and questions that made people uncomfortable. Why were certain delays always blamed on crews instead of systems? Why did experienced mechanics leave after training new hires? Why did customer complaints from certain airports receive faster responses than others? She had purchased the airline because she believed transportation was not just about moving people. It was about deciding who was trusted. And now she was standing in the front cabin with a red mark beginning to form across her cheek. Marcus looked at Caroline. "You're saying there was no physical contact." Caroline's expression tightened. "I'm saying she moved toward me." Gail looked at her. "I moved away from you." Caroline looked toward the other passengers. "Can we do this somewhere private?" Maya almost smiled. That was the first reasonable request Caroline had made. But the timing mattered. A private conversation was exactly how situations like this disappeared. "I'm willing to discuss it privately," Maya said. "After the report reflects what happened." Chris entered another note into his tablet. Caroline noticed. "Are you documenting everything?" "Yes." "Why?" Marcus looked at her. "Because that is the procedure." The answer was simple, but it carried weight. For the first time, Caroline was no longer controlling the story by being the first person to speak. A flight attendant from the rear galley, Tessa Monroe, stepped forward carefully. "I saw part of it." Marcus turned. "Tessa," she swallowed. "I was preparing drinks in row 7. I heard the conversation." Caroline looked surprised. "Tessa, you were not standing here." "No," Tessa said. "I wasn't." She looked uncomfortable admitting it, but I heard enough. Marcus waited. Tessa looked at Maya, and at Caroline. She asked for the boarding pass. The passenger showed it. Then Caroline asked if she booked it herself. Caroline immediately responded, "Hey, that is not what this is about." Tessa looked down. That reaction told Marcus more than a perfect statement would have, because people usually interrupted when they knew which detail could hurt them. Maya noticed Tessa's hesitation. "You don't have to say more than what you personally saw." Tessa looked at her. The kindness seemed to surprise her. She nodded. "I know." He turned back to his tablet. "Did you see the contact?" Tessa hesitated. A few seconds. Then yes. The cabin became still again. "I saw Caroline's hand make contact." Caroline's face changed. "You're misunderstanding." Tessa shook her head. "No, I'm not." It was not a dramatic accusation. It was worse. It was a simple correction from someone who had decided she could no longer pretend. Ikas looked at Maya. "Why didn't you tell me immediately that you were the owner?" The question was quiet, but Maya had been expecting it. She looked past him toward the rows of passengers waiting for the aircraft doors to close. "Because if my name changes the way people treat me, then the problem is bigger than what happened today." Nobody spoke. Marcus lowered his eyes. That answer bothered him because he understood it. He had seen the same pattern from the inside. A passenger with influence received patience. A passenger without it received policies. Maya sat down in her seat, not because she was giving up, because she was tired. There was a difference. She opened her notebook again, but she did not write about Caroline. She wrote one sentence. "The system reveals itself most clearly when nobody knows who is watching." Then she closed the notebook. A few minutes later, the captain entered the cabin. Captain Aaron Wells was not smiling. That alone told the crew something had changed. "Ms. Ellison," he said. Maya looked up. "Yes, I've been informed of the situation." She waited. "We need to ask you to remain on board while operations conducts a formal review." Maya nodded. "That is appropriate." Caroline looked relieved, until Aaron continued. "Ms. Voss, you will also remain on board." Leaf disappeared. Aaron looked at both women. "The aircraft will not depart until the incident documentation is complete." A passenger near the window sighed. Someone checked the time. A child in the next row asked his mother why the plane was not moving. A normal flight had become a corporate test, and nobody on board yet knew the hardest part. The question was no longer whether Maya Ellison owned the airline. The question was whether the airline she owned was capable of treating her like any other passenger before anyone knew her name. Part 4. The flight did not leave the gate. That was the first thing passengers remembered afterward. Not the argument, not the announcement. Not even the fact that the woman sitting in 2A owned the airline. Remembered waiting, because waiting was where uncomfortable truths had room to grow. For 23 minutes, the aircraft remained connected to the terminal while operations reviewed the incident. Passengers watched crew members move differently. The usual rhythm of boarding had disappeared. Nobody was joking in the galley. Nobody was rushing through safety checks. Everyone knew something serious had happened, but nobody knew exactly what. Maya sat by the window with her notebook closed on her lap. She could feel people looking at her. Some were curious, some were embarrassed, some were trying to decide whether they should apologize for witnessing something they had not stopped. That last group was the one Maya understood best. Silence was rarely empty. It was usually a choice made by someone calculating the cost. Her phone vibrated. The message was from her younger brother Jordan. "You okay?" He saw the delay notice. Maya stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "I'm fine, flight issue, handling it." Three dots appeared almost immediately. "You always say that when you're not fine." A small smile crossed her face. Jordan had been saying that since they were children, before boardrooms, before ownership papers, before people treated her differently after learning her name. Back then, Maya was simply the girl who repaired broken radios in her father's garage because she wanted to know how things worked. She still remembered her father telling her something she carried into every meeting. Machines don't care who touches them. People do. Her phone buzzed again. "Don't turn this into another project." Maya looked at the message longer than she expected, because that was exactly what she wanted to do. Investigate, rebuild, make sure nobody else experienced the same thing. But Jordan knew her better than most people. Sometimes Maya approached pain like an aircraft problem. Find the failure point, replace the damaged component, test the system, move forward. People were not machines. They carried things longer. "Maya," she looked up. Marcus stood in the aisle. His expression was different now. "Not fearful, responsible. We need your statement." Maya nodded. "Is taking it." Marcus hesitated. "Operations compliance. Not local management? No." That answer surprised him. Why? Because the people closest to an incident are sometimes the people most interested in explaining it away. Marcus did not argue. Because he knew she was right. They moved to the small area between first class and the galley. It was not private, but it was away from the passengers. A compliance officer named Leah Porter joined through a secure tablet connection. Maya noticed immediately that Leah did not start with an apology. It mattered. Instead, Leah said, Ms. Ellison, I'm reviewing the preliminary report." "Okay, I need your account of the interaction." Elle looked at Marcus, then back at the screen. "Before I give it, I want one thing clear." Leah waited. "I don't want this reviewed differently because I own the company." The statement caught Marcus off guard. Leah nodded slowly. "Understood. I want it reviewed the same way it would be if I were any other passenger. That is our obligation." Ed glanced at Caroline. The flight attendant was standing near the galley, listening. Maya continued. "Then start with the first question." Leah looked down at her notes. "Did you refuse a seat verification request?" "No." "Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Did you threaten the crew member?" "Physical contact?" "No." Leah paused. "Did Ms. Voss make physical contact with you?" Maya looked at Caroline. Caroline looked away. "Yes. Describe it." Ed took a breath, not because she was unsure, because she was choosing her words carefully. "She struck me after I asked not to be touched." Leah entered something. "Are you injured?" "Not seriously. That wasn't my question." Maya looked at the screen. "A small detail." "A good one." "Then yes." The cabin remained quiet. Leah continued. "Do you have any request regarding the employee involved?" Marcus looked at Maya, so did Caroline. Everyone expected the answer. Suspension, termination, a public statement, something powerful. Instead, Maya said, "I want the process followed." Caroline finally spoke. "Of course." Philip turned toward her. "No, not of course." The words were still calm, but that is exactly what needs to be tested. The compliance officer continued typing. Then a new notification appeared on Leah's screen. She read it. Her expression changed. "What is it?" Leah asked. Leah looked up. "We found another report." Maya frowned slightly. "About this incident?" "No." Leah looked at the information again. "About a similar interaction involving Ms. Voss." Caroline immediately stepped forward. "That's unrelated." Leah stopped typing. "Maybe." The word carried no accusation, only uncertainty. and uncertainty was dangerous for anyone who had built their confidence on nobody looking closely. Maya looked down at her notebook. For the first time that day, she opened it, not to write about herself, to write a name, Caroline Voss, because the situation had changed. This was no longer only about what happened in Seat 2A. It was about whether Seat 2A was the first place anyone had bothered to look. Part 5. The discovery did not arrive as a dramatic announcement. There was no raised voice. No one stood in the aisle and declared that the truth had finally appeared. Instead, it arrived as a document opened on a compliance screen. A record, a date, a pattern. And that was often how organizations changed. Not because someone finally made a powerful speech, but because a detail that had been ignored long enough became impossible to ignore. Leah Porter continued reviewing the information. MIMS received a customer interaction concern 4 months ago. Caroline crossed her arms. A concern is not a finding. Leah looked at her. That's correct. The answer seemed to calm Caroline for a second. Then Leah continued. But it was closed without escalation. Marcus frowned. Why? Leah scrolled. Supervisor note says the passenger was described as difficult to manage. Maya looked at Marcus. There it was. Not the same incident. Not the same passenger. But the same language. Words that sounded neutral until you noticed who they were usually attached to. Who reviewed it? Maya asked. Leah checked. Regional customer experience. Who approved closure? Leah hesitated. Your question suggests you already know there is an issue. No, Maya said. The question suggests someone decided the first report was not worth examining. Nobody responded. Caroline shook her head. This is becoming ridiculous. We are talking about a completely separate complaint from months ago. Yes, Maya said. Then she looked at her. And that is why it matters. Caroline's expression hardened. Because I made one mistake? Maya did not answer immediately. She understood something important. A person could make one terrible decision. A person could also belong to a system that repeatedly made certain people easier to doubt. Those were different problems. It required different solutions, Leah continued. There is something else. Marcus looked at her. What? The earlier complaint was not only about behavior. Leah turned the tablet slightly. It was about selective enforcement. Caroline stepped forward. That passenger refused instructions. According to the report, Leah replied, and according to me. Yes. Leah paused, but there is no documentation showing which instruction was refused when it was given, or who witnessed the refusal. Pierce looked down. That was the problem. The report existed, but the foundation underneath it did not. Maya noticed Caroline's face. Not panic. Not yet. Something closer to frustration. The frustration of someone realizing the rules they had used on others could eventually be applied to them. The captain approached from the cockpit entrance. Operations has a question. Everyone turned. Aaron Wells looked at Maya first. Ms. Ellison, they need confirmation. About the aircraft ownership disclosure. Maya nodded. Why? Because there is concern that the crew may have been influenced after learning your identity. Maya understood immediately. That was the danger. If the company investigated too quickly after discovering who she was, people could claim the process changed because she had power. The same unfairness could return wearing a different uniform. Tell them not to adjust the review because of my position, Maya said. Aaron looked surprised. You're sure? Yes. But you own the airline. I know. She looked toward the passengers waiting quietly. That is exactly why I cannot ask for a different standard. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus asked the question he had been avoiding, Miss Ellison, why were you flying this route without anyone knowing? Maya looked at him. Because I was reviewing the customer experience. Marcus nodded slowly. An inspection? No. She touched the notebook in her hand. An observation. What's the difference? An inspection tells people they are being evaluated. She looked around the cabin. Observation shows what happens when they think nobody important is watching. The sentence stayed with Marcus. Because he realized something uncomfortable. The airline had spent years teaching employees that executive visits mattered. They prepared. They smiled differently. They followed procedures more carefully. But the real measure of a company was what happened when nobody expected consequences. Leah returned to the screen. I have enough to request a formal review. Caroline looked at Marcus. You're suspending me? Marcus answered carefully. No. You'd surprised everyone. Suspension is a decision made after proper review and based on policy. Caroline relaxed slightly. Then Marcus continued. but you are being removed from active duty pending investigation. The difference was small. The consequence was not. Caroline looked at Maya. You wanted this. Maya shook her head. No, her voice softened. I wanted the next passenger to have a fair chance. That answer landed differently, not like a victory. A responsibility. The aircraft doors remained open. The flight was still delayed. But the problem had moved beyond one seat, one employee, and one moment, because now the airline had to answer a harder question. If Maya Ellison had not owned the company, would anyone have looked twice? And nobody in that cabin had a comfortable answer. Part 6. The flight finally departed 2 hours later, but nobody on board considered the delay the real disruption. The delay was visible. Departure appeared on schedules, passenger notifications, and operational reports. The harder problem was invisible. It was the question sitting behind every conversation after the aircraft left the ground. How many people had experienced something similar and decided it was easier to say nothing? Maya sat in her seat during takeoff, watching the runway lights disappear beneath the clouds. For most passengers, takeoff was a moment when the world became smaller. Phones went into airplane mode. Conversations stopped. People surrendered control to a machine and a crew they trusted. For Maya, that trust was the entire reason she had bought the airline. Not because she wanted a company with her name attached to it. Because she believed transportation was a promise. A person should not need to prove their worth before they received basic respect. 30 minutes into the flight, Marcus returned to the first-class cabin. He looked tired. Not physically, professionally. The kind of tired that came from discovering a problem inside something you cared about. May I sit for a moment? He asked. Ed gestured toward the empty seat across the aisle. Marcus sat down. I owe you an apology. Maya looked at him. For what? For assuming the worst part of this situation was the employee. She waited. Marcus continued. I thought the issue was one person making a bad choice, but the review team is finding something more complicated. Ella closed her notebook. What are they finding? Not a pattern of identical incidents. That matters. Marcus nodded. Yes, we are not claiming every complaint is the same. That answer earned his respect from Maya. Too many organizations made the opposite mistake after an incident. They rushed from ignoring a problem to exaggerating it, replacing one unfair judgment with another. It is continued. But there is a pattern in how complaints were classified. Maya looked at him. Explain. Certain words appeared repeatedly. Such as, Marcus glanced at his tablet, difficult, uncooperative, emotional, disruptive. Maya leaned back. Were those words connected to specific actions? That's the concern. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Actions they were. Sometimes there was no detail attached. Maya looked toward the aisle. That is how credibility gets removed, Marcus nodded. He understood. A label could become a shortcut. A person stopped being someone who experienced a situation and became a category someone else created. Across the aisle, Daniel Brooks had been listening quietly. I'm sorry, he said. He turned. For what? I should have said something sooner. Daniel looked down at his hands. When I saw it happen, I knew it was wrong. But I thought the crew would handle it. Maya studied him. That is what most people think. I keep thinking about that. Daniel gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. I've complained about bad service before, but I never wondered whether the person complaining would be believed. Maya did not respond immediately, because that was the honest part. People often understood unfairness only when they imagined themselves on the other side of it. A flight attendant approached the cabin. It was Tessa. She stopped near Maya's seat. Can I talk to you? Maya nodded. Tessa looked nervous. I want to say something before I lose the courage. Maya closed her notebook. Okay, Tessa took a breath. Caroline told us her version. I almost believed her. Maya said nothing, not because I saw what happened. Tessa looked at the floor, because she was the crew member. That sentence was harder than any accusation, because it revealed something simple. People trusted positions, uniforms, titles, skills, sometimes before they trusted facts. I'm not proud of that, Tessa said. Maya nodded, but you corrected it. Picked up. Eventually, yes. Maya's answer was gentle, but eventually matters. Tessa smiled faintly. Not everyone would say that. Not everyone understands what it costs to admit you were wrong. The flight continued through the afternoon sky. But back on the ground, the investigation expanded. Operations had reviewed Caroline's previous reports. Compliance had requested additional passenger feedback. and the board's audit committee had been notified. Not because Maya demanded it, because the evidence had reached the level where ignoring it became a decision. Later that evening, Maya received a message from Leah Porter. Formal review approved. Independent compliance team assigned. Maya read it twice. Then another line appeared. Request. Please do not participate in final findings beyond your role as affected passenger and company owner disclosure. Maya smiled slightly. It was exactly the message she wanted. A fair process did not need her hand on every decision. She replied, agreed. Follow the facts. Then she placed her phone beside the notebook. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel something she had avoided. Not anger, not satisfaction. Evil. Disappointment. Because the hardest part was not discovering that one person could make a harmful decision. The hardest part was discovering how many systems could quietly make room for it. And the next morning, when the formal review began, the question would no longer be whether Caroline Voss had made a mistake. It would be whether Ellison Airways had built a culture where certain mistakes were easier to make against certain people. Part 7, the formal review, did not happen in a boardroom with dramatic speeches. It happened in a room with fluorescent lights, printed reports, and people who knew that the smallest details often carried the most weight. Maya had learned long ago that real accountability was usually less glamorous than people imagined. It was calendars, emails, interview notes, timestamps, the slow work of determining not just what happened, but why it was allowed to happen. 3 days after Flight 482 landed, Maya entered the Ellison Airways compliance building through a side entrance. She had chosen that entrance intentionally. No cameras, no employees gathering in the lobby, no announcement that the owner had arrived. She wanted the process to belong to the facts, not her position. Inside the review room, Leah Porter sat with 2 members of the independent compliance team. Marcus was there as an operational witness. Tessa had provided a statement the previous day. Caroline Voss sat across the table with a representative from employee relations. For the first time since the aircraft, Caroline looked smaller, not powerless, just aware that the situation had moved beyond her control. Leah began. This review concerns 3 questions. She looked around the room. First, what occurred during the interaction on Flight 482? Everyone remained quiet. Second, whether the response afterward followed company policy. She turned a page. And third, whether previous reporting practices created a risk of inconsistent treatment. Maya noticed the wording. Not guilt, not conclusion. Questions, that mattered. Leah displayed the first piece of evidence. Cabin incident report. Ms. Voss, this report states that the passenger became confrontational and physical contact occurred while you were attempting to maintain order. Caroline nodded. Yes. Do you stand by this statement? Yes. Leah looked at the next document. Then we need to address the cabin witness statements. Caroline's expression changed slightly. Leah continued. 2 crew members and 1 passenger independently described the sequence differently. Caroline looked at Marcus. Of course they did. They are protecting her. Marcus looked uncomfortable, but he answered. No one asked me to protect anyone. Leah continued. The issue is not whether people like Ms. Ellison. She pointed toward the documents. The issue is whether the accounts match the available information. The room became quiet. Then Leah brought up the next item. A customer interaction report from 4 months earlier. Caroline shifted in her chair. We already discussed that. Yes, Leah said. But we have not discussed why it was categorized as a behavior issue rather than a service recovery issue. Caroline frowned. Because the customer was difficult. Leah looked at her. What specific action made the customer difficult? Caroline opened her mouth and stopped. It was a small pause, but everyone noticed. Leah waited. Finally, Caroline said, I don't remember the exact details. She looked down, not because she was surprised, because she was disappointed. A vague memory had become a permanent mark in someone's record. Leah made a note. It is important. Caroline leaned forward. So now every complaint I handled is being questioned? No, Leah replied. Only the ones where conclusions were recorded without supporting details. That distinction mattered. The review was not looking for a villain. It was looking for where judgment replaced documentation. Marcus spoke quietly. I want to add something. Leah nodded. Marcus looked at Caroline. When employees are under pressure, we rely on each other's notes. Caroline looked away. And if those notes are incomplete? Marcus paused. Then the next person inherits a story instead of information. Maya heard the sentence and remembered it, because that was exactly what had happened to her. Before anyone saw the boarding pass, before anyone knew her name, she had inherited someone else's assumption. Leah moved to the final evidence, a system audit. During our review, we found that employee reports involving customer conflict had different completion standards depending on the supervisor approving them. He frowned. Different standards? Yes, Leah explained. Some supervisors required specific behaviors, times, and witnesses. Others accepted general descriptions. Maya leaned forward. And who reviewed those differences? Leah looked at her. No one until this review. The answer was uncomfortable, because it meant nobody had intentionally created the problem. And yet the problem existed. Leah closed the file. The preliminary finding is that Miss violated company conduct policy during the Flight 482 incident. Caroline looked down. But, Leah continued, the review also identified a broader compliance failure. Maya listened carefully. This organization allowed subjective descriptions to influence customer records without consistent verification. Stayed silent, because that was the part nobody wanted to admit. A single employee could make a harmful choice, but a system could make that choice easier to repeat. Leah turned to Maya. Mrs. Ellison, we need your approval for the next phase. Maya looked confused. Approval? Yes. A wider audit of customer interaction reports. Everyone looked at her. She had the authority to order it, but she did not answer immediately, because this was the moment where power could become another kind of problem. Finally, she said, approve the audit. She paused, but not because I was involved. Leah waited, because the next person who sits in that seat should not need to own the airline to be taken seriously. The review moved forward, but the cost of that decision was already becoming clear. An audit would uncover problems. Problems would create consequences. And consequences would affect people who had nothing to do with Flight 482, including employees who had followed imperfect systems because they believed those systems were enough. For Maya, that was the difficult part. Justice was not only about correcting what happened, it was about deciding what responsibility looked like after the correction began. Part 8. The audit changed the conversation inside Ellison Airways. At first, people expected it to be about Caroline Voss. They expected a story with one person at the center, one decision to blame, one consequence to announce. That would have been easier. Easier for employees. Easier for leadership. Easier for everyone who wanted to believe the problem had already been removed. But the audit did not find a company full of bad people. It found something more difficult. It found a company where good intentions had sometimes replaced good systems. Over the next 3 weeks, the independent compliance team reviewed customer interaction reports from 12 airports. They did not search for names. They searched for patterns. How were complaints written? What details were included? Who approved them? What happened afterward? Maya stayed away from the process. That was the hardest part. Every instinct she had told her to walk into the review room, ask questions, connect information, and push the organization toward the answer faster. But ownership came with responsibility, and sometimes responsibility meant knowing when not to use power. Instead, she worked from her office reviewing ordinary business matters, aircraft maintenance schedules, fuel contracts, route performance. The same work she had done before Flight 482. The difference was that now people looked at her differently. Some employees were uncomfortable. Some were embarrassed. Some were suddenly eager to show that they had always respected her. And noticed all of it. She trusted very little of it, because respect that appears after discovery is not the same as respect that existed before. One afternoon, Marcus stopped by her office. He looked exhausted. "Paid time?" Maya closed the maintenance report in front of her. No, Marcus sat down. The audit team finished the first phase. And he handed her a summary. Maya did not open it immediately. What did it find? Marcus looked at the paper. 7 reports that need additional review. Out of how many? Several thousand. Maya nodded. That mattered. Numbers mattered. Not because they reduced human experiences into statistics, because accuracy protected people. 47 does not mean 47 guilty employees, Maya said. Marcus smiled slightly. I was hoping you would say that. Why? Because some people are already asking whether we should terminate everyone connected to those reports. Maya sighed. There it was. The action she expected. the desire to prove change by creating a new injustice. Are they asking for evidence? They are asking for confidence. Those are different things. Marcus looked at her. You really mean that? Yes, she opened the summary. Accountability is not punishment because people are angry. It is responsibility connected to facts. Marcus nodded. Then he said something that surprised her. I owe Caroline something. Maya looked up. Do you? I don't mean forgiveness. He shook his head. I mean honesty. Maya waited. Marcus continued. I spent years thinking employees like her were the whole problem. The person who says the wrong thing. The person who handles a situation badly. He looked down. Approved reports. I trained supervisors. I helped create a culture where a confident employee could write a vague note and everyone trusted it. Maya understood, not because Marcus was the same as Caroline. He was not, but because responsibility had layers. A system did not repair itself by finding one person to carry everything. The final review meeting took place the following week. Caroline attended. It looked different. Not broken, not defeated, just quieter. Leah presented the findings. Regarding the Flight 482 incident, the review confirmed that Ms. Voss used inappropriate physical contact and failed to follow customer interaction procedures. Caroline closed her eyes briefly. The consequence was clear. Employment status will be determined according to company policy. Dramatic announcement. No public humiliation. Just process. Then Leah continued. However, the audit also identified organizational failures. She listed them carefully. Inconsistent documentation requirements, insufficient supervisor review, lack of escalation standards for disputed customer interactions. Maya listened. You see, because this was the part that mattered. The airline had not only failed because someone acted badly, it had failed because the system allowed certain judgments to travel farther than the facts. Leah looked toward the leadership team. The recommendation is a company-wide revision of customer incident reporting, mandatory supervisor training, and an independent review channel for disputed cases. Yours nodded. Maya did too. Then, Leah turned toward Caroline. There is also a recommendation regarding your employment. Everyone became still. Caroline looked forward. Based on the findings, termination is recommended. The room stayed quiet. Caroline nodded once. No argument. No accusation. Just acceptance of a consequence she had spent weeks avoiding. After the meeting, Maya found Caroline alone in the hallway. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Caroline said, You could have ended this on the plane. He looked at her. No, Caroline seemed surprised. Why not? Because I did not want power to replace fairness. Caroline looked away. A few seconds passed, then she said, I still don't understand why you didn't tell us. Maya answered honestly, because I wanted to know who the airline was when nobody knew my name. Caroline absorbed that. And for the first time, Maya saw something different on her face. Not agreement, not forgiveness, understanding. The case was nearly closed. But the most important change had not happened in a meeting. It had happened in the ordinary moments afterward. A supervisor asking for details instead of assumptions. A crew member questioning a report instead of accepting it. An employee realizing that a uniform gave responsibility, not automatic credibility. The airline had not become perfect. No organization did. But it had finally started measuring the distance between what it promised and what it practiced. And for Maya, that was the only measurement that mattered. 9. 6 months later, the first thing people noticed about Ellison Airways was not what had changed. It was what had not. The plane still took off late sometimes. Passengers still complained about lost luggage. Weather still delayed routes. Employees still had difficult days. Maya never believed a company became better because it announced that it had changed. Real change was quieter. It appeared in the moments nobody celebrated. A supervisor stopping a report and asking, what exactly happened? A customer service agent refusing to write uncooperative without describing the behavior. A crew member choosing to ask one more question before making a judgment. The airline was learning that fairness was not a feeling. It was a practice. The new customer interaction policy had been implemented across all airports. Every disputed incident now required specific details, witness information when available, and a review process separate from the immediate supervisor. The changes were not popular with everyone. Some employees complained the process was slower. Maya expected that. Anything that removed shortcuts usually felt inconvenient to the people who benefited from them. But the results were difficult to ignore. Complaints were being resolved more accurately. Employees had clearer protection. Passengers had a way to challenge decisions without needing influence or connections. And perhaps most importantly, people had started separating authority from assumption. One afternoon, Maya visited the airline's training center. She did not announce herself. She rarely did anymore. Inside one classroom, a group of new flight attendants were reviewing customer interaction scenarios. At the front of the room was Tessa Monroe. Stopped outside the door when she heard her voice. The first question is not, "Do I trust this person?" Tessa was speaking to the trainees. The first question is, "What do I actually know?" Maya smiled slightly. Tessa had been promoted to training support after the review, not because she had been perfect. She had not been. She had hesitated. She had almost accepted someone else's version of events because it came from a person wearing the same uniform she wore. But she had corrected herself, and that mattered. After the session ended, Tessa walked out and saw Maya. She immediately looked nervous. "I didn't know you were coming. That's usually when I learn the most." Tessa laughed softly. "Oh, that sounds exactly like something you would say." They walked down the hallway together. The training center smelled like coffee and fresh paper. Somewhere nearby, an aircraft procedure simulator was running, creating the low mechanical sound of engines starting. Tessa stopped near a window. "I still think about that day." Maya looked at her. "Why?" "Because I keep wondering what I would have done if I had been the only person there." Maya understood the question. Not because she had an easy answer, because she had asked herself similar ones. "What do you think you would have done?" Tessa looked outside. "I don't know." Yet honesty mattered more than a confident response. "I hope I would have spoken sooner." Maya nodded. "Most people think courage feels obvious when it arrives." Tessa smiled. It doesn't? Usually it feels inconvenient." They stood there quietly for a moment. Then Tessa asked, "Do you forgive Caroline?" Maya looked toward the training room. The question was expected. The answer was not. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right measurement." Tessa waited. "Some things need accountability before they need forgiveness." And Tessa nodded. "And after," Maya thought about it. "After people decide what kind of person they want to become." That was the part no policy could force. A company could require training. A company could create procedures. A company could remove someone from a position. But it could not manufacture honesty. Later that evening, Maya returned home and placed her notebook on the kitchen table. The same notebook that had fallen on the floor of Flight 482. The cover was still scratched. The edges were still worn. She opened it to the first page after the incident. The sentence she had written was still there. "The system reveals itself most clearly when nobody knows who is watching." Underneath it, months later, she added another line. "The system changes when people choose to look." Her phone rang. It was Jordan. "You working?" Maya looked at the notebook. "Not right now. Miracle." She laughed, a real laugh. Kind she had not had on the aircraft. "You called just to check if I'm relaxing?" "No." A pause. "Then I called because I saw the article." Maya looked toward the window. The article had been about the airline's reforms, not about the slap. That was intentional. The story was no longer about a moment of disrespect. It was about what happened afterward. "I'm proud of you," Jordan said. Maya leaned against the counter. "Thank you. You know you don't have to fix everything." She smiled. "Ain't working on that." And for once she meant it. The case that began in Seat 2A was over. The employee involved had faced consequences. The airline had changed its process. The passengers who watched had learned something about silence. The people inside the company had learned something about responsibility. But Maya also learned something about herself. Winning did not mean proving she was powerful. It meant creating a world where power was not required to be believed. Part 10, the official announcement, came 9 months after Flight 482. It was not a headline about a flight attendant losing her job. It was not a story about a powerful woman proving she could destroy someone who had wronged her. Maya Ellison made sure of that. The company statement focused on the findings, the reforms, and the responsibility of the organization. Caroline Voss had been terminated after the independent review confirmed the violation of company conduct policy. The decision was not based on Maya's ownership position. It followed the same employee standards that applied across the airline. The audit also resulted in broader changes. Customer interaction reports were rewritten. Supervisors were required to document specific actions instead of relying on descriptions like difficult or uncooperative without context. Employees received additional training on disputed interactions. A separate review channel was created for customers who believed a decision had been made unfairly. The airline also created a quarterly fairness review committee that included employees from different departments, not only executives. The goal was simple: make sure problems could be examined before they became patterns. For Maya, that was the part that mattered most. The slap on Flight 482 had been painful. The assumption behind it had been worse. But the final measure of the company was not whether one employee was punished. It was whether the next person sitting in seat 2A would have a better chance of being heard. The morning after the final report became public, Maya returned to the same airport where the incident began. She did not arrive for a ceremony. She did not stand beside a banner. She had a meeting with the maintenance team about aircraft turnaround times. Normal work, that was intentional. The airline still needed to run. People still needed to repair equipment, answer passengers, handle weather delays, and make thousands of small decisions every day. A company was not changed by one investigation. It was changed by what people did when the investigation was over. Before leaving the airport, Maya walked through the first-class cabin of an aircraft preparing for departure. Seat 2A was empty. For a moment, she stood there, not because the seat carried pain anymore, because it carried a reminder. She remembered the woman she had been that day. Not weak, not powerless, just someone who wanted to be treated like every other passenger. It had always been the point. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jordan. "You near the seat?" Maya smiled. She had not told him where she was. "How do you know?" His reply came quickly. "Because you always go back to places where things happened." She looked at the seat. It was right. But this time, she was not returning to relive the moment. She was returning to see what came after. Years earlier, Maya had believed fixing systems meant finding the broken part and replacing it. Life had taught her something more complicated. Sometimes systems broke because people stopped paying attention, and sometimes they healed because people chose to look again. The story of Flight 482 was closed. The report was complete. The consequences were delivered. The policies were changed. The people involved had moved forward, carrying different versions of the experience with them. Tessa continued training new crews. Marcus became part of the company's operational review team. Caroline left the airline and began rebuilding her career outside aviation. No apology could erase what happened. No consequence could undo the moment. But the truth had been acknowledged, and that mattered. Months later, Maya received a message from the Customer Relations Department. A passenger wanted to speak with her. Not about Flight 482, about something else. A traveler had experienced a dispute at another airline, and after reading about Ellison Airways reforms, they wanted advice on how to document what happened properly. Maya stared at the message. This was different. Not another version of the same fight. Not a chance to repeat the past. A new choice. She saved the contact information. Then she closed her laptop. For now, the work in front of her was still her own company. But she knew something had started beyond one airline. And the next question was no longer whether people would believe her when they learned her name. It was whether the systems around them could learn to listen before they did.